Welcome to episode 20 of Here to See the Shelbourne. 20 episodes in already. How time flies. It's Andy here back this week. I know you all missed me, particularly Dunny, but big thank you to Lee Daly, Lee, who sat in for yours truly over the last couple of weeks. And for some reason, the listenership numbers went through the roof since Lee came in, so hopefully we'll be able to maintain that high standard. But I think the most important thing that we learned from those two episodes with Lee was that his relationship with Dunny is as strong as ever, and it's always very positive. So once again, thanks to Lee, and no doubt we'll be hearing from Lee in the weeks and months ahead. Dunny, great to be back. How have things been? I know you are just back from a very pleasant-ish weekend in Cork. How was that for you?
How you doing, Andy? Welcome back. And yes, thanks again to Lee for stepping into the breach so ably. I would think I was the only Shels fan who stayed over in Cork. The beauty of paying for a non-refundable room, but the pluses and minuses to being able to get your head down on a pillow a bit earlier than arriving into Drumcondra at 2 a.m. or whatever it would have been on the bus. I made my way back at a leisurely pace the next day, but a bit of a mixed bag in that respect, and a bit of a mixed bag on the field as well as it transpired.
Well, Donny, you and I were probably one of the few who weren't spotted in Terminal 2 early on Saturday morning, jetting off to warmer climes. But let's start on Friday night. It was our last game before that mid-season week or two break. Chance for Shels to push on, just try and clamber up that table a wee bit, but it ended in, can I possibly say, a slightly predictable 1-1 draw. What were your thoughts on the evening's events?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, predictable. I mean, it certainly felt very familiar, didn't it? The way things sort of unfolded. It did have a very predictable feel to it once the game got underway. But I mean, ultimately, you couldn't really ask if you're going to try and get 2 consecutive wins in a row this season, having the bottom 2 clubs back to back. You're not on paper. I don't think you're obviously not going to get an easier attempt at it. So it's a bit of a shame that we failed to do that. But as I say, kind of the predictability began with a good opening 10 plus minutes. I thought we looked very much in control, which has been something we've mentioned previously on the pod, Andy, that we've started games, even some of our worst games, like Derry away, for example, we've started quite well. That was the case again. We pushed them into their half and we had a lot of possession. And it's for some reason at maybe the midway point or so, maybe slightly earlier than that, the bottom really just fell out of our performance, and we were scraping to not go in behind at the break.
We saw the squad itself looking a little bit healthier in terms of the return of certain players like Lewis Temple and Paddy Barrett, but would be fair to say that they're not going to be the panacea for the remainder of the season. It's certainly going to be a squad effort in all senses. But Ali Coote, credit to Ali. Ali had a fantastic equaliser. But Dunny, Meepo again seems to be getting a bit of stick, unduly and unfairly, in my opinion. The Shels fans sort of need to just give themselves a bit of a tap on the head and say, come on, get off this guy's back. You know, there's a long way to go in this season. I saw a recent stat from League of Ireland where Meepo either had or was involved with the majority of chances created attacking-wise or shot-wise. So he has a lot of positivity to his game. I think he's still only 22, maybe 23, but I still think we're lucky to have him in the squad. Will this break possibly be good for him, just to give him a week off, just to reset?
Well, I mean, no more him than anyone else, I would say, Andy. And look, we've touched on it before, and I don't think we should labour the point, because I think sometimes you don't want to talk down to anyone about how they feel about, players in the team and so on, and sometimes harping on about what is probably still a minority of people going in overly hard on one particular player, you can kind of create a bit of a cyclone around that. I'd rather not put too much emphasis on it, but certainly, what I didn't like to see, and I did see a bit of it down there in Cork, to be honest, where people, certain people, and again a minority, I think, are just looking for mistakes, and then when the mistakes happen, they are almost gleefully saying, "Well, look, I told you so. Look at that," and then they won't remark on the other bits that go right, and then when something doesn't come off, they're again, jumping to criticize. So I think we have a lot of issues in the squad right now. I think we've had the whole season, and the guy who's joined top scorer, I don't think is wouldn't be top of my list of things to fix. So um, moving on to something more positive, I'd like to say that it's good to see for Ali Coote, him getting the goal, not just because it benefits of us, obviously, with another point on the board, but more to the fact that I can imagine he's been feeling pretty hard done by lately. He can't sort of win for losing when it comes to a run of luck. The manager doesn't seem to want to put him and Harry Wood in the same team at the same time, and because Harry has been playing so well, Ali's been the one who's been sort of sacrificed and had to stay on the bench. Um, Obviously, there was the incidents in Daleyman Park where I thought it was curious actually when he was booked wrongly um, for simulation. He didn't even argue with the referee. He had the sort of body language of a man who feels pretty down at heel and that he can't catch a break. I know he had been suffering with a bit of an illness and something else as well before that. So between kind of knocks and illnesses and very, very harsh sending us off and just the manager's whims, Ali really hasn't been able to catch a break. And I think his performances have actually been very positive when he's played, no matter how few minutes it might have been. But so great to see him get a goal. He only got one last year, a very memorable lob against Bows. So to have him already on the score sheet with a goal is great. And it was a beautiful finish. But unfortunately, the stats would suggest that that was our only shot on target. So we could have done with a bit more of that. But fair play to Ali. It's good to see him among the goals again.
We put out a message over social media in the last couple of days, and we've had a huge feedback in terms of comments, questions. I think we'd be here all evening going through them, as some of them are like a chapter from War and Peace study. But thank you to everyone who did take the time to write them. The overriding sense, Donny, is the interest in who possibly could come in the transfer window. Now, that's always much easier said than done. Let's face, for example, the so-called key targets, you would imagine, the so-called better players I would expect, be under contract. So will we now see, is it Jamestown, the data analytical company that Shels announced earlier in the year?
Uh-huh.
Will they come into action? We shall see.
Mm.
I'm not going to put you on the spot, Donny, and ask who do you think we should be bringing in, because it's you might as well just pick the lottery numbers. It's a tricky one, but it is true. We need that. We need a bit of a injection of something, don't we, just to try and spice things up. Circa 2000, was it 23 when we think we brought in Matty Smith and one or two others, which definitely gave us a push. Is that where Duffer's focus will be on now for the next week or so?
Yeah, I definitely think we need it for multiple reasons, Andy. On the field, for sure. I think, and you may or may not want to go into it subsequently, and maybe some of the comments might allude to it, but given, you know, the manager, his changes and so on, and not just on Friday, but lately, the sort of wholesale, um, 3 subs at once, subs happening early in games. I think it's pretty obvious that there's a dynamic issue within the squad that he's trying to address. Frankly, I think we probably need some fresh voices, some fresh bodies, some fresh motivation for players when they're training out in the AUL to maybe up their game or show the best version of themselves. Maddie Smith coming in, obviously, we Harry Wood and Jarvis came in and gave us a great shot of adrenaline into our seasons previously. Um, you could go back even to in the first division with Ian Morris when we plundered Denzel Fernandez and Jays Cabia from Cove Ramblers, two players who were not really on anybody's radar. They came in, and the verve and the spark that they gave that team ultimately carried us back to the Premier Division in a very memorable way. So I think it's if we want to, and we do, finish top three anyway and qualify automatically for Europe, and have a good run in Europe if possible, and the cup competitions as well. Then I think we're going to need this. We're going to need a shot in the arm from somewhere. So hopefully it can be provided by some new arrivals. Jamestown, this is their first window, as far as I'm aware, with us. So if we could get someone of high quality in through their channels, that would be fantastic. And as I said, those two players from Hull obviously came from not playing much adult senior football, and they came in and really gave us a springboard to do great things. So the talents are out there. It's just a matter of looking at the ones that would be a good fit. So fingers crossed.
Thank you, Donny. Just before we move on, some levity from our good listener John Fraser. John, thanks for sending us in. I think it could be speaking for some of us, but as a Shels fan, I should know better. But I'm feeling optimistic. Surely, John, you can't be optimistic, but John says, I'm interested to see what starting 11 changes we might see with Coyler freed from his defensive deputy duties. That is an interesting one. We shall see what happens in the weeks ahead. So as for now, we'll park it there, Donny. We have a very special guest coming up shortly. Everyone seems to be off on holidays, Donny. So let's hope they come back refreshed, refocused, and we have a bit of a resurgence in the second half of the season. So thanks for that, Donny. So as I said, we've had so many comments in this week. We unfortunately can't get through them all, but we do read every single one. We note them and we keep a track. So thanks for all the great comments, questions. I know Donny was accosted down in Turner's Cross. Lots of questions being thrown Donny's way. Donny, the pro he is, feels them and loves to meet the locals and take on any feedback. So thanks again to everyone who has taken time to get in touch. So the men's team are off enjoying themselves, sunning themselves, hopefully. But this show gives equal time, attention, and care to the women's side of things. And one man behind the scenes who's been there for a number of years now, real Reds will know who he is. He's a man who has enormous respect and has a lot of say and a lot of weight in his opinions over the years. And we are delighted to welcome the current women's Premier Division team strength and conditioning coach, Davy O'Connor. Davy, thanks so much, and you are very welcome. How are things?
Hey, good evening, lads. Thanks very much for having me. It was mid-season break. Everybody else is off, so here I am. Happy to fill
Right,
in the
Davey.
void. So thanks
Yeah,
very much for asking us on, lads. A pleasure.
no, it's pleasure's all ours, Davy. It's someone we've Tony has slated your name for many months, but I know you're usually in match mode in terms of your focus. So we had to grab you while we could. So thanks for joining us, Davy. Now you've been around this
No
club
problem.
in many guises for a number of years. You've spent time with Owen Heary in the men's team, Kev Doherty in the men's team. But the last four seasons or so, Davy, you've been the strength and conditioning coach on the women's side of things. What
Yeah,
exactly
I think that's
what exactly is your job, Davy? Can you give the
yeah.
uneducated like myself a layman's terms of what does that entail on day to day or week to week with a high level performing team like the women's team?
Yeah, look, I suppose it's a job. It's probably grown a bit more than prominence, a bit more probably well known in terms of the makeup of a backroom team throughout team sports. The name tends to change, but I suppose the role kind of doesn't. And look, effectively, my job is you're there to build and deliver effective protocols and supporting the girls, both in their overall health and their physical performance. You're there to support the manager, the backroom team, and they're the collab and work closely with the physio as well to obviously make sure we're getting girls back playing if they're out injured. The return to play piece is extremely important. So, and then look, on top of that, look, you fill your water bottles, you pick up your cones, you help out, you get the gear out in the pitch, you're there for people, you lend your ears. And you just make sure that you're being useful around the place. There's an intensity to what we do. There's no doubt about it. But look, I mean, what it goes down to, you wouldn't do it if you didn't enjoy it. And look, I'm very lucky. You've said it there. This is my 5th season with the girls, and it's been fantastic. And look, as you said before, that no more than yourselves, and 30 years going to Salka Park, and to be involved at the highest level with people like Kev, Owen, people I idolised growing up. It's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful journey. And just to preface that as well, the man sitting there with you, we have a lovely story ourselves, don't we? We the under-18s at Shels Academy, where we I don't want to say masterminded the league win, but we oversaw it. We facilitated it anyway, and we were very lucky. We had an absolutely wonderful group that year, Donny, which I'm sure you'll remember. Absolutely brilliant group of players that went on a really, really good battle for a league title with St. Kevin's at the time, and it's one of my fondest memories, and something I really look back on kind of prior to stepping up to sort of first team level. But it's been incredible, an amazing journey, and look, I do appreciate it, and look at it fondly from sort of a distance, I suppose, quite regularly, because look, the one certainty in football is that these things don't last forever. So, as I said, with the intensity, effort you have to put into it, you have to enjoy it as well.
Yeah, Davey. It went right to the wire that year with St. Kevin's, but very memorable. And it's good to see. I've actually recently seen some of our players from that season still coming down, watching matches now at Talca Park, some with their family and some just out for a Friday night. So Shels have obviously stuck with them, which is great to see. But yeah, Andy, it was Davey was a very serious operator then. I was just trying to facilitate his vision for the team that we had at the time, and Davey's gone. We kind of veered into different directions, not necessarily maybe full opposites. Davey went more sort of Bear Grylls, climbing mountains and so on, and I went a little bit more Keith Richards. But we all have our talents. But and as well, just on what Davey does, and I know he won't say it about himself, but I saw it then when we were with the 18s, and I know for a fact that you wouldn't get to work with the managers and the caliber, at an elite level that he's worked with, without him having excellent interpersonal skills, without him being far more than an S&C coach. I know a lot of the women's players have frequently reminded him of that by saying how much that he helps them through difficult personal journeys and things that we don't see as the punters who pay in on a Saturday or a Friday when he was with the men, but really making an impact on people's lives through his role. And that's the type of thing that you can't really quantify, not even in medals and titles or anything like that, but that helps to create an atmosphere that's a family atmosphere, a good working environment, and the type of place that would allow former players and so on to want to come back to Shell. So I think it's vital to have people like Davey who have a love for the club and who embody the best things about the club, and showing what it means to him in the best possible way and all of his attributes to the player. So we really are blessed. If Davey wasn't such a one club man, he absolutely would have been. I'm sure he's had multiple offers. He would have been able to pitch up at multiple clubs between the first division and Premier in the men's, or anywhere in the women's Premier Division. So we're lucky to have him, and that's all of my smoke blowing done in one go there, Davey.
Well said, Donny. Davey, before we all start welling up here, let's go back about 10 years or so, maybe 9 or 10 years. You started with, correct me if I'm wrong, was it Kev Doherty and then Owen Heary? Can you tell us?
I suppose.
Can you tell us what it was like back then in Shels? And obviously we were first division, we were up and down. Money was tight. There was, crowds weren't huge. But what was the environment like when you started off? Can you tell us, like, on your day one, what was your overall thoughts? Coming as a real Shells fan, but now you're like in the inner circle of the senior team setup.
Yeah, look, I suppose again, I obviously know Kevin a long time, just from growing up around the club, and even the schoolboy clubs we were with, St Martin's and Donecarney, who his family were involved with. But Kev was with the 19s when we were with the 18s, so there was a little bit of a working relationship there anyway. But he he invited me up to get involved, and he took the job with Johnny Martin as his assistant. And look, as we know, obviously from a fan's point of view, it was obviously quite a fallow period. It was a difficult period for sort of all of us and everybody in the club. But look, it's no surprise when you look at what Kevin's achieving now as a manager with Drogheda, what he's done. I said it kind of joking like before, but I saw that coming. Like from day one, when you stepped into a dressing room with Kev, like he was on it. He was on it from the minute you walked in, with players, with staff. Um, Incredibly passionate, incredibly demanding, and I'd like to think that in that period he managed the team over. I think it was maybe 18 months or so, that I hope that sort of the time has been kind to him. And when we do look back with a bit of hindsight, that what he had available to him, I think he did an extremely good job with what was a very, very young team. But his knowledge, his like this guy lives and breathes football, and it was interesting from a point of view that I remember, aside from kind of my own work, which similar enough of what I addressed there. I remember on a Thursday night we used to do a little bit of shape work, and it was usually in Tolka Park, very short session, little bit of tactical work, where he'd take your starting 11, and then he'd have sort of the bomb squad as such would make up the opposition. But I was always asked to step in as a right winger, just in that shape work, and it was brilliant from an education point of view, because you were on the pitch actually seeing the detail, seeing the movements, getting that information almost firsthand that was given to the players from a positional sense. And there was nothing he didn't see. It was incredible. And at that stage, I think Kev was quite young. I think he maybe would have been 35, 36. But like I say, you could just see that level of detail. And as I said, the biggest thing is just that passion he had for the game. And obviously, he was a wonderful player, as we do recall too. But I think he did his very best. In my honest opinion, I think there were too many players that just didn't quite get it and maybe didn't appreciate what he was trying to do for them. And I remember when he stepped down that night, I think it was his last game in Tolka, it was the first time I was really saddened in football, because I had seen it. I'd seen what he'd given to them, seen what he tried to do. But again, like the integrity of the man to be able to hold up his hands and say, look, this hasn't worked out as best I'd hope, and I'm going to step aside and let someone else do that, because that takes, whatever about taking guts to go and manage a team, I think it takes guts to do that as well. Like, so I'm just delighted. I'm sure everybody is. I know there's definitely a bit of bite with the Shells Drogheda games as of late, but I think anybody kind of who's been around long term, I think quietly is very happy to see him do quite well. And his assistant as well, Johnny Martin, was a very shrewd operator. He went on. He had a very successful career playing wise with Longford and with Shamrock Rovers, and then he went on. Then I think he was CEO at Rovers for a while. So very astute kind of businessman as well. But really good dynamic within the two of them. They gave me a lot of trust, a lot of respect, and a lot of time to kind of develop myself, which it was at that stage as a coach, and a wonderful education for me to step in and be part of that.
Would there be a feeling there, Davey, at that time that maybe for both Owen Heary and for Kev, that particularly as you look at where Shells are now and the backing we have financially and what we've been able to do since maybe beginning around 2018, 2019 after Owen left, that they were kind of, having to work with one arm sort of tied behind their back really when it came to budgets and so on, that it would have been an incredibly hard job to succeed in at that time and get promotion.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that's what I mean. I certainly look back and say, yeah, Kev, I think you did okay here. I think with Owen, he was, again, look, I wasn't too au fait as sort of budgets or that side of it, but I think probably what Owen did was he got kind of more senior players around him that he knew and trusted. Now, maybe that was more of a favour on their part. I'm really not too sure, but he probably had a more of a senior edge. If you look at that squad kind of unfinished with, you had the likes of Alan Bourne, Aidan Collins, Dave Mulcahy, Derek Prendergast, Lorks, Dino, a lot of senior players. And he, in fairness down, he kind of, I don't want to say step back, but he let them sort of run the dressing room as such. And I know certainly being in the stands that year, a lot of people, like, it maybe wasn't the prettiest to watch, but I mean, we probably weren't far off either. I think it was too many draws in the end. If I'm right, I think we only lost one game that year. Went to that playoff, that bizarre playoff against Drogheda, but I think that was own sort of way of dealing with exactly what you said, like what he had available to him was just get people that he knew and trusted, go as senior as he could. And look, I think for what he had available to him, he certainly did his best and probably got the best out of that squad. Maybe that's up for debate. I'm not too sure, but look, again, as you said, it's just such different times. It really is. And again, being a part of it, seeing, I suppose, the whole atmosphere around the club was very different as well, you know. But yeah, look, I think we could make those kind of comparisons with a lot of managers and a lot of clubs, couldn't you? If the times were different, if you got the job at certain times, but I think in respect, it's one thing being involved is that I'm definitely not as quick to criticise any manager, because I've just seen how difficult it is at that level. It's an extremely thankless job, I think.
Yeah, they were both coming in as would that have been their first senior jobs, maybe, or close enough to it. Owen might have worked at Sligo possibly before, um, but I remember speaking to Owen Heary around that time, and the boycott of home matches was in effect. And he was talking to me and saying, "Look, is there any way we can make some progress on this? Because the atmosphere at home matches was very poor. Obviously, the attendances were through the floor. And again, I'm sure now, he's doing punditry work, and he's talking about matches at Talca Park and seeing 4,000 and 5,000 figures week on week, and you must be thinking, Jesus, that's outstripping even when he was there as captain, the kind of numbers we would have had. So as you say, you sort of jump on the carousel, and you can't really. There's so few jobs at senior level in the country that you can't really pick and choose. Where you might come in and wait for perfect circumstances, because they might never occur. Do you feel that in the women's game that are there differences, similarities there between the sort of time and the pressure, maybe the pressure from fans and people, there's a little bit more of a long game being played by clubs?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, look, I think the one thing with Shels, and again, probably very player driven as well, is that, like, when you're with this club in that women's division, like, you compete to win with the first team. There's no doubt about it. Since the amalgamation with Raheny, and obviously the club coming under one umbrella, like that's always been a goal at the start of a season, is that we're here to compete for trophies. And again, that has to be, obviously, if it's driven by players, brilliant, but you have to have the right man in place then to take that on as well. And look, again, I'm talking about my experience then from going with Owen and Kevin to then work with Noel and Joey, was like brilliant experiences, like, and then obviously you've a very different dynamic then with Owen and Rory as well. So, but like, again, I go back, I just to speak of my own experience, like, I've been very lucky to be just surrounded by kind of winners. It's probably that term that gets thrown around very loosely. You talk about kind of high performers, but I do think when you're around them people, it does bring you on, because there's no room for passengers. And I will say, particularly when I came in, when Noel brought me in, I think the one thing I saw straight away from him, in terms of creating that right environment, was giving those players a lot of freedom to make mistakes. Now, I don't know, was that based on what he had seen before? Maybe, I'm not too sure, where he felt some of the players were a little bit, too wound up, too rigid, a little bit fearful. Probably on the back of finishing second for a couple of years in a row. But he would make that very clear in the dressing room before every game. He's like, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying. And he'd have the same lines kind of every week, but he'd always say it like, just come in at half time, still in the game. He says that's all you can ask for a first half, and then we take it from there. But you could certainly see it in those early years with him. His first 2 years, a league and a double, like he really did build players up, give them that freedom to go out and play and be themselves. Because I think the one thing with the girls, I do think we've a bit of an identity. Like, we're sort of known as a team that will play football, that will attack games. And if there is a period where we do go away from that, it's usually brought up kind of in the media discussion, like, oh, Shels are gone very direct, like as if it's quite a shock. And not that there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes you have to do it, but I think that's maybe a testament to sort of the players right from the start, and those who've been there a long time as well. That they want to win, but they want to do it with a bit of style as well. And again, you talk about winning, the will to win. I think Owen and Rory have brought that through as well. I think to get that cup win the first year for them in terms of a management team is really important. We're halfway through a season now, and look, it's the same message. You take, who have we got this week? Let's build towards that. Let's take that game on as best we can, and then move on. Like, so. Look, it's as I said, I've been very lucky to see that and be a part of that identity, I suppose, as well. But there definitely is an intensity, I think, is the word I sort of use. I don't want to say pressure, but there's definitely an intensity to it that, like, look, this isn't a local GA club, but we're here to develop, we're here to build people up. As I say, kind of physically, but look, technically, personally, all those elements that make up the personality of a player. We want to do that as best they can, and if it's players looking to get into an Ireland squad, players who want to go abroad professionally, you want to make sure the environment is supporting that as best way we can.
Davey, can I just on that point there? What is their mindset, particularly for younger players, when it comes to a potential career path into a professional career, i.e., let's say the UK? Are they fully aware that they have a certain amount of talent that's got them to this point? Or do they need a little bit more reassurance and encouragement to really dedicate themselves to the professional mindset to push them to that next level?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer is both, to be honest with you. I think there'll always be outliers. And look, I suppose from my time with the girls, the obvious one is Jessie Stapleton. She's stepping up 15, 16 years of age to senior football. And you could see not just the kind of, the defensive ability or the technical ability, but just that kind of very calm sort of head on her shoulders from day one. Very kind of mature, very clued in. And you'd look at her and say, yeah, she's going to go somewhere. And I mean, I think by the time she left age 18, she'd 70 odd first team appearances, which is incredible for such a young player. I don't think I played 70 games in my entire career, to be honest with you. Like, but, you see people like that straight away there's something special there. And then equally, as you say, that there's definitely players there where you're looking, thinking, Jesus, if only you could see what we could see, or maybe, as you said, your technical side is just off the chart, and it's the recovery piece, just doing those little bits extra that maybe still has a little bit of that schoolgirls mentality, and that's an end that might need a bit of work. So there's no right answer, Andy, to be honest. I've seen that make up in different ways over the years, but the one thing I do believe that with the girls, if you do have that kind of raw talent as such, I think it is realistic to say there is a bit of a pathway if you can apply yourself appropriately. Now, look, a whole other debate is if you go to England, that's an absolutely massive step up. It's massive. I think I heard Ruthie Littlejohn was on a podcast last week talking about this, and she's not one to mince her words, to be fair to her, and she was very honest about it, saying, look, players need to realise what they're stepping up to when you go abroad. And it's massive. And look, I think, to be fair, it's the same in the men's. If you go across to England, it's an absolutely huge jump. So yeah, look, it maybe ties in a lot with I suppose some of my own work in terms of that physical preparation and making sure we're giving girls a really good foundation that if they do go away, that the base is there and they can use that to kind of build on. But look, a good example, if you look at Kate McCabe, is the ultimate Irish success story in women's football. She went abroad, and I think she went out on loan to I think it was Millwall at the time. It took her a very long time to sort of establish herself in that Arsenal squad. So um, I think maybe as coaches we probably have to paint that real picture for the players as well, if that is their ambitions. That look, there's a massive gap here in every capacity, and you've got to be aware of that, and you've got to be patient as well.
We have a lot of the squad, particularly at Shels, Davy, who are, well, as you said, when you actually step back, you realise how young some of these players are. How do you yourself, of a man of a certain age, not as old as me for sure, but when some of these players are half your age, for example, and they're still girls. I've daughters who are slightly younger than that, but there's a lot going on in their lives. And to ask them to dedicate themselves fully or professionally as possible in that sort of looking after themselves. It's not what you do on the field, it's what you do at home, it's what you eat, rest, and sleep. Is that a difficult challenge, or do you think, as you may have touched on it there, that the fact that they're already at this level means that they have something in them? Have they grasped that and accepted it, or is there any little battles here and there that you have to try and encourage certain players to maybe just squeeze that extra 10% of professionalism out of them to fully dedicate themselves to programs when they'd rather be going out with their buddies somewhere?
Yeah, well, look, again, I think first of all, you need to strike a balance that even when you are fully committed and giving every inch of yourself, like that, there is a switch off. That's very, very important. I think it is important that people are getting away from football at some point throughout a very intense season. But yeah, look, I think from my point of view, look, all you can do is educate and guide. A big thing for me is patience, and I'll always say that to young players, whether it's a male or female. Like you say, I'll ask them, like, how old are you? You're like, you're 16. It's like, right, so you're going to be playing for the next 20 years. There's no fire here. There's no panic. Let's just take your time. But as you said, make sure that whatever the good habits are, that you're kind of doubling down on it. And it's funny, like, because look, I would have been fairly wound up when I was younger about kind of standards and doing things right, and probably been overly harsh on myself. But then you see some people that just absolutely take it in their stride, and they're so chilled out about everything. Um, it's just different personalities, but the approach around patience is definitely something I've, even with my own kind of one-on-one work, it's something I sort of lead with. Don't try squeeze everything into this quick fix of 4 or 5 weeks. Like, look at things macro level. Zoom out, have a look at things of where you're at and where you're going to be. And it's similar, sort of nice kind of way to look at it is to say, like, look, if you were going to go and do a college course and you want to get your degree, it's going to take you 4 years. You don't get handed that degree in the first day. Like, so yeah, look, you have different personality types, obviously, and some people want things yesterday, and that's fine. You do your best to accommodate everybody, but look, patience is a massive leader for me, and yeah, it's never too late.
Davey, I think it's probably fair to say at the minute we're at a bit of a transitional point with women's football in general in this country. I think it's definitely, as Andy alluded to there and yourself, that it's being seen as a viable option now to start in this league, to try and give yourself a platform to have a career in England. Katie McCabe, as you said, obviously leading the way for, and obviously having just won the Champions League. What better way to maybe light the beacon for Shels players in the academy and so on. Well, you have semi-pro contracts, more national coverage of the league, more national coverage of the international team, and obviously qualifying for the World Cup and all that. But at the same time, I feel like the Irish clubs are putting a lot of work in on the ground. You know more than yourself. There's no compensation available for players when they go and sign pro contracts in England. So for all of the work that people like yourself are doing, and we would take great pride in Jesse Stapleton's achievements and other ex-Shels players, but the sort of hours that go into to getting her that far, the rules as they are now dictate that we can't get any money back into the
Mm.
club for that, which is very disappointing. I think that it feels like both sides haven't really coalesced to make it a platform that works not just for the player but for the club.
Yeah, it's a good point. And look, I think the line I heard somebody say is like, it's not a charity we're running, like, and I think certainly, I mean, Jesus, the amount of players we've certainly sent abroad over the years is quite frightening. Like, now look, at the same time, I think there's stories there in themselves. There's marketing there in itself that certainly, just because we didn't get a few bob out of it, we should still be using them success stories as leverage, I suppose, like to keep people interested in the club. Um, yeah, and look, I think when initially when that was announced about the pro contracts or semi-pro contracts, I think maybe people, oh Jesus, panic stations because you're going to have 16 professionals on your books. But I think in essence that's what it was brought out for. It was almost so clubs could protect themselves, that if there is somebody that's showing that promise and has been brought through a system that, rightly so, a club is going to get its just rewards. And look, again, I'm not too clued in of financials, but look, I wouldn't imagine you're talking, massive money here, which to be honest is more of a reason we should be entitled to it from where it's coming from. Like, but um, again, it's probably something that needs to be almost strategized maybe. And again, I'm just thinking out loud here that, okay, over the next 5 years, can we get 10 professionals and get two abroad maybe? And look, they're very, very loose numbers. I get that. But I think that's sort of, it almost has to be looked at as a business proposition with really solid strategy that's tied into where the club is going. There's a lot of really good stuff, a lot of really good kind of coverage and promotion around our club and its image over the last couple of years. A lot to do. Obviously, the men's team are doing so well. You've got a character like Damien Duff that brings so much attention to the overall package. Like, we really need to tie it into that. I think the whole image, the whole direction that the club is going in, and where we hold ourselves. Because look, the Duffer's the obvious one. He bloody makes us all feel great about ourselves. So we really should be latching onto that as a package. But look, again, I'm conscious I'm going off on a bit of a tangent there, but I'd certainly like to see it put as a business package, more sort of strategic than very year by year, if you get me, or kind of month by month. Let's see how she gets on. And I think that's the only way that's going to work. Because look, as I said, the alternative is just dishing contracts out to everybody, and that's probably not going to work either, in terms of a sustainable process.
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't take much. You can look at our national team squad for any upcoming international fixture, and there's Shelbourne fingerprints all over them. Former players, and of course this season with Davine Clancy and help me with
Alex was in there.
Alex Kavanagh. Sorry, yeah. Thank you. How did I forget her? Yeah, Alex Kavanagh being, of course, in the squad as well. That we're not just looking at players that we've sent. I know that there's a secondary European competition coming in for women's clubs from next season on. We'll be able to qualify for two competitions. So, I'd like to see a bit of joined up thinking, maybe for not just our own club, but clubs that take the women's game seriously, like ourselves. Putting things in place whereby if we're, it costs the same amount to rent a pitch to train a men's team as it does a women's team, and there should be, where there's compensation for male players who go abroad, it should be the same in the women's situation as well, because obviously we have been doing extremely good work there, and as you said, it's not a charity, but it does seem to be going in the right direction. The one area perhaps where it might be lagging behind a little, Davy, is in the numbers through the turnstiles. Now, I know this isn't your bailiwick. You're very busy with what you do behind the scenes to get the best product on the pitch. But we're coming in. I think the league attendances are up, particularly in Dublin, across all clubs. And I think our fan base at Shels resonates with the women's team more than any other club. I would I'd absolutely agree with that statement and argue it that we know more of our own players, even people who don't go to games as regularly as myself and Andy maybe still know the stalwarts that we've had for years. We recognise our own players and their ability more than I think any other football club in the country. But is there any sort of low hanging fruit or areas you think that as a league we could maybe tap into to overall improve attendances week on week of people coming in through the turnstiles?
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? I think, look, again, we probably have to look at it along with the lens of the men's game. And what I mean by that is generally what is happening on the Friday night will probably affect the attendance. And if you look this year alone, I mean, there's been a lot of weekends where you've had a game on a Friday and a Monday, and then our women's team are playing on a Saturday. I don't think there's too many families or parents that are going to bring their kids to 3 games over a 4 day period. So that's probably something to look at. Again, I bring it back to we've got to look and stop looking at it from an empty stadium point of view, in the sense that, well, Tolka looks empty. We've got to look at it from what good looks like. What is considered a good crowd, and I don't think, could be wrong, but I don't think we've ever really sat down and said that, and said, right, well, what is considered actually, an appropriate number of people showing up here. In my own opinion, I think anything around the 500 mark at present is quite good. And I think if you can get that 500, which we have done on numerous occasions, the key is keeping that 500, working with that 500 who are there, um, and creating, I suppose, creating a bit of theatre around the day itself, um, with the match being a sort of an add-on. Like, now, look, again, I know we've tried different things, but I mean, again, what could be? I think you guys may have spoke about this a few weeks ago. Could you have a situation where Damien Duff is there with the league trophy from the men's, and there's a photo opportunity, something like that? But I'd actually be interested in your thoughts, like from a staff point of view, from someone involved. My opinion is, let's get 500 in the door and keep them. And again, I'm not sure how that would level off across the other clubs in the league. But I think if we are to be ambitious, great. But I think we also need to be realistic as well. So that's my thoughts. And I'd be interested as you guys, from attending the games, is 500 reasonable, or do you think we should be aiming higher?
I'll maybe throw to you in a sec, Andy, but I think 400 to 500 per match. As you said, if you can repeat that week on week, match on match, I think that's a perfectly good start. As much as I do get frustrated sometimes when numbers fluctuate from maybe around that level and then can drop by a couple of hundred and then can bounce back up. At some stages, I do sort of have to remember that it was very recently that these games were being played almost behind closed doors, where there was, just up in the AUL or wherever it would have been with absolutely no fanfare at all. So to have literally hundreds of people coming to every game is certainly a long way from that. And we've been able to, and this is why I'd back the argument that we have this connection with the women's team that is unparalleled in the country, is that when they do pitch up in semi-finals and finals or league deciders or whatever, we get out an immense crowd, and we've broken records doing that. And people wouldn't come to those, if they didn't know about their Paris Slattery's and their Noel Murray's, and kind of have this sort of base knowledge already, where they feel that they know enough to show up and feel invested in it. So I think we've done a lot. I think there will be probably a sit down before this season is over to plan for next season. We obviously have Kirsten Sample now in the door as well, working as the community officer. That can only produce better things going forward. But yeah, I'd like to maybe see for next year that there's maybe a sort of a blueprint of this is our plan for the next 3 years to get from, let's say, if you want to say 500 to a sustainable 650 or something like this in 3 years' time, and how we're going to get there. What do you think yourself, Andy?
Yeah, you covered a lot there, Donny. it's I think it's worth remembering that 10 years ago this club was in a fairly diabolical state, both on and off the field. Clubs like Bohemians have had community officers in place for probably the best part of a decade, and we can see that they've reaped the rewards, particularly on their men's side. So I wouldn't be too harsh on where we are right now, but here comes the but. We have to. I agree, Donny. I think 400 per home game is achievable, and I then think from then on we start to try and build it from there. It's very difficult, as Davey said, is to get people to um, come to Saturday games because they all have other commitments. But we want people to know that the secret that's down there. There's something very special there on a
Mm.
Saturday afternoon, Donny. I've had the privilege of doing LOI TV for a couple of years, and I get to watch the matches, get to meet the players, and it's a great privilege. And something I've never done was being able to pull on that red jersey, and I know how important that is to each one of those players, and that means a lot to me personally. Wider view, as you said, we got Kristen Sample there now. We got Tony O'Neill doing great work in the community. I think that's going to take time, and we can say, look, we got a big game coming up against Athlone in around 10, 12 days. Let's get everyone and their ante down to that and have a huge crowd. But 2 weeks later, when we're playing, I'm not sure who it is. Let's say it's Sligo. I know it's not Sligo, but and then we drop back down to lower numbers. That's not what we want. So I know the kickoff times have been adjusted from 2 to 4. That's I don't quite know if that's worked yet. We'll see what the data comes back with at the end of the year. Look, there's a lot of moving parts here. So I don't have the answer. I know you don't have the answer, Donny, but all we can we're saying the same thing week after week. We have a fantastic women's Premier Division team down there, and I just would like people, if you're listening to this, just give it a go. Just go down, and there's no better occasion on Saturday week when Athlone, the champions, come to town, and that is going to be a ding dong battle. But we have Mossy Quinn in place now as CEO. We have a good team of people there, and I'm sure this is fairly high on their agenda as how to get bums on seats consistently because we have a very good product. And these players and coaches and people like Davey deserve enormous credit, respect, and support for the next couple of years and beyond.
Well said, Andy. Yeah, and it might be a good time to jump in actually about the upcoming game because look, we'll say it every week because it's true, but we do have the best team in Ireland. Pound for pound, we are the most skillful, the team that is best on the eye that I've seen since I've started watching the women's game in this country. We have consistently, whether we've finished top of the league or not, we've always been the most entertaining team for me. And the trophies and our consistent success speaks to that. But and I might get your opinion in a moment, Davey, about the feeling sort of within the camp about the All Ireland Cup because this Saturday we're away in Sligo, Saturday the 7th. And I mentioned it on the pod before, Andy, that we're going to try and get a mob to an away game outside of Dublin. So there are trains leaving at 9:05 and at 11:05 on Saturday morning. That'll get you into Sligo in time for the match. And there's a train at 5:05 or 7:05. I'd recommend the 7:05. Leaving Sligo, that'll get you back well in time for last orders or your last bus or last start at 10 o'clock or so. And it's just €30 for a return ticket. So I know Colleen Cushown are going to make a big push to try and get as many people on those two trains in the morning over to support the team in Sligo. I'll be booking my ticket tomorrow. I've had a few people in touch with me today already saying that they booked theirs. So I'll probably be going on the early train, the 9:05. The stout in Sligo is particularly good. So to get a few in before 3 p.m, I think is the order of the day, and then home on the 7:05 train from Sligo back to Dublin. So I'm looking forward to that. And Davey, yeah. So I know you'll be there, not on the stout. on the isotonics as per usual. Again, Bear Grylls meets Keith Richards. The collab that we were born to see. Um, what are your own thoughts on the All Ireland Cup and the opportunity it gives to the staff and to the players, as opposed to the other competitions?
Yeah, I think it's definitely more relaxed even come match day. The one thing I will say, and you sort of said it there, and certainly from Owen and Rory's point of view, like as you've just said, there's no lack of quality in our side, and I don't envy the lads having to pick a team every week. So, it's from that point of view, I think it's been really good for them. Just to sort of rotate things, get people in. And look, I think a good example this year is probably Nia Hannon. Again, another player, one of our own. You've seen her feature a good bit kind of off the bench this year. And then she's using them games then to just step up, kind of get your full 90 in. So that's a prime example of how it serves its purpose. But look, the other side, now go back to the attitude of the players. And I mean, I remember, I think it was one of the games last year in this competition. Pearl said it in the dressing room beforehand. You like when you're with this club, if we're in a competition, you're here to win it. Like so, that's the attitude. Once your warm up's done and you're out in the pitch, that's the attitude the players have. And I mean, you only have to look. We were beaten in the semi final last year against Rovers. When we absolutely battered them, like, and it was quite devastating by the end of it. So I think the balance is actually quite right with it. As I said, it can be have a bit more of a relaxed feeling. But certainly for those playing, those starting, those who want to be on the pitch, I think it sort of it levels out. I think it's a good opportunity to have. And look, again, like you said, the fact you're committing to it, we're playing these group games. Let's go further and do our best to win it. Like so, because look, as you go further through the rounds, there's no doubt about it. You certainly want to be in a final and have that day out and get your hands on a trophy. I think it's probably a shame there isn't more than Northern clubs in it. It maybe doesn't suit them the setup. I could be wrong, but I think they're sort of either only starting or at the end of their pre-season when these games come around. So you're probably not getting an even contest. But look, that said, I think Glentoran had a good win over that Loan in that first round. So the couple of games we've played looked worth their while. So yeah, look, it serves its purpose. I think, look, again, sustainability wise, if you look over the course of 4 or 5 years, will it still be there or in that same format? I'm not too sure. But look, I don't look at it as a hindrance, to be honest. And I think particularly if you look this week, I think to have that Sligo game before the Athlone game, I think is probably looked at as a positive. Because I think if you were to come back off a break and have that, your top of your table clash, I think it probably does a bit of a disservice to the league to have that the first game back after a break. Whereas I think just giving the two teams a 2-week lead into that should make for a better kind of spectacle as well. So yeah, look, as I said, overall, I think the competition serves its purpose. And as you said, hopefully we can just kick on, get out of these group stages and push on as far as we can with it.
Yeah, I've said it here on the pod, I think with Andy before, that I think us winning this competition would actually give the competition a bit more prestige. Now I know I'm obviously couldn't be more biased in saying something like that, but having a club with the following that we have and being able to bring crowds to finals, we have the pedigree and that we've shown it, to do it for a competition that's still trying to find its feet and its identity maybe with the public. I think having us as champions would probably serve it quite well. And as you say, it's interesting dynamic now to see that we have such a big game coming up the following week. I wonder if maybe that might affect Owen's planning on who might be starting in that match. That might be seen as a good opportunity to get more familiar faces in the 11 prior to the Athlone game the following Saturday.
Yeah, so we have Davey. Sorry,
this is where I give you the politician's answer. I'm not getting into team selection. We're the politician with that, like.
Absolutely.
You'll have to get on.
We're not going to let you off easy, Davey. We have a couple of questions in from our listeners. First one from Robbie. Can you describe the dynamic of the relationship between an S&C coach and the team manager? How does that
Yeah,
work
look,
behind the scenes?
yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, look, communication is key. Like, and look, I think I said it already. Like, I've had Noel and Joey gave me a lot of trust and a lot of time to do my work, and Rory and Owen have been exactly the same. They've been brilliant. Myself and Nicole, the physio, we work very, very closely together. So we'll do a lot of we'll do weekly check-ins with the players, and they're sort of very health based. We're looking at energy levels. Obviously, with female football, we'll have a look and see if there's anything around kind of menstrual cycle, anything that may affect their energy or their performance. We're obviously looking at injuries. We're looking at minutes that they played. All of that is taken into consideration. And look, all we do, we'll just let Owen know. We'll just relay the information, and it's used. I always say this to the players: what we relay to Owen is used to protect the players. It's not to be used against them. It's just we want him to know that if somebody's looking a little bit off, it could be because they had an exam that day, or there could be something nothing to do with football. But look, they're quite informal conversations. We don't sit down really heavy detailed meetings. We have our own kind of group with staff, obviously, that we relay information, and then we'll have a chat then when we arrive at training. But you just give the information. There's never arguments or anything like that. But anything we see, we pass it on, and then the management can make their decision from there. But other than that, you'll always link in terms of the session plan, and let them know what's being planned. You might give a little bit of input around kind of layout of games or certain drills. But it's down to Owen at the end of the day. The lads can plan their session as required. And you never step out of line. But as I always say, when I'm asked my opinion, I'll give it. But I know me role, I know me lane, and I obviously stay in that. But the two lads, they're brilliant. Honestly, they've been absolutely fantastic to work with. Really, really good kind of modern approach to the game, to people. Probably no surprise, say, with Rory as kind of that head coach, on the ground, that he's a teacher, and I think that's always a really positive transition. And I think, and Dunny, you're no better man, but I think it definitely leads to a little bit more kind of patience and listening to people, and kind of being well mannered on the training pitch as well. They've really impressed me as kind of, for their first time as a management team coming into such a high level sort of operation. They've done really, really well. And like I said, for them particularly, I was delighted to see them get that cup win last year, and hopefully they can add to that as well. But as I said, there's no big secret. It is just keeping lines of communication open day by day and week by week, and that's how it works.
I was going to ask who's the good cop and bad cop, but I think they're both good cops from what I can see. So
yeah,
whichever way,
they're both
both
very approachable.
Absolutely. Another question here, Davey. This might be for more Nicole Brindle's domain, but let's see, from Steve Lesware. Soft muscle injuries seem to be on the rise. Is this down to training methods? And what can be done to reduce these? Do you want to take that one?
No, I can answer that. Yeah, I'm not too sure. The context, is it with us or just the game in a whole? But
I think it's overall. But he hasn't stated Shelbourne. I think he says overall.
Yeah. Well, I think from us, as I said, we do our best to kind of make sure we're managing the load as best we can. But in a broader sense, there is a kind of debate that, if you look Premier League, for example, is there too many games that are being played at a really high pace? You take in considerations of travel in between European games. The European leagues have obviously gotten so much bigger and competitive as well. The one thing I will say, injuries will always happen. We can do all we can to try and prevent them. We do all we can to try and prevent them, but it's a contact sport as well. So you're always going to have a few niggles, and then you'll obviously have people. And if you look at the makeup of our team, where you do have a lot of senior players in their 30s, as well as the younger group, there's a lot of wear and tear as well. So it becomes a case of just managing a couple of different tendinopathies as well. We've been quite lucky in terms of muscle pulls. We haven't had anything quite acute. The ones we'd see is sort of over time a little bit of wear and tear, and it's something we to be well aware of, particularly now heading back after the break. Because look, it's a big physical demand. It's absolutely massive over the course of 10, 11 months of the year. So it goes back to what we started with at the beginning of this conversation about really honing in on recovery and how to look after yourself kind of physically and mentally as well. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I know, like, probably again, I think Arsenal was one that got a bit of profile this year because a lot of kind of hamstring injuries. What I would say is I think every individual is different, and it would depend a lot on the individual's training, sort of history, their age, where they played, the game time. There's so many contributing factors to that. But as I said, from our point of view, to zone it back in, we just do our best to make sure they're prepared as best as possible.
One last one here, Davey. How have strength and conditioning training techniques changed in the last decade? That's from Mark.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one thing I'll say is the introduction of so much data and technology is something that continues to sort of evolve the profession, if you will. And you have to be careful because whilst there's obviously a lot of positives to have any kind of objective marker with performance metrics is really important. But at the same time, you can't lose sight of the human side of it as well. And that's something. It's a bit of a balancing act, and it's something that it certainly overwhelms me very very easily because this technology changes and evolves so quickly that you're only getting used to sort of one dashboard or one certain setup, and then you suddenly find out it's advanced again. So look, I suppose the obvious one, the GPS vests, is the big one you sort of in the public eye. And players, from a player perspective, you can see a lot of players getting very sort of wound up about distance that they're covering, which is usually around maybe 10 or 11K on a match day. But the reality is it's not that important. Like, do you think Pirlo, when he was sitting in the middle of the park for Italy, covered 10K in a game? I can guarantee he didn't, So you're trying to educate them right in that from a player's point of view as well. But it's forever changing. It serves its purpose, but I think just finding that balance between data technology and the human approach is always a challenge. I think as well, then, look, probably when this role maybe became sort of public knowledge as such, it was more of a gym based kind of practice. Whereas I think maybe now there's a lot of contribution on the pitch in terms of the conditioning piece. There's a constant kind of debate over whether you should be running with the ball or without it. I think certainly for me, a lot of my work with the group would be on the pitch. It's very conditioning based, and purely because of the time we have, we do our gym work prior, which is group led. And then they'll do their individual strength work on nights when we're not together. And look, that's how it works with us. Other teams may have more time. Every team is different. For example, I worked with Dublin Camogie for a season, and it was a flip to that. 99% of my work was in the gym with that squad, so it can be quite different. The range can be different, but if it was to pin out on one thing, I think definitely the technology and how that's continuing to develop has certainly shaping the role and keeps you on your toes and challenges you.
One last question for me, Dave. You just stole my thunder there. Those little data packs that you see the players wearing and they're tucked into their jerseys. I've often seen Mauro Martins on a Friday night chasing after players, picking out their little data trackers. Haven't seen you doing it just yet, but what do you actually do with them? Like, what do you bring them home? Do you plug them in somewhere, extract the data, and what do you do with that information? I think you've actually sort of answered the question that a lot of it is what you do person to person, but I was always interested as to what's the key indicators from those packs.
When they work, I'll tell you, when they work, they're great. You say you're right. Like, I've seen Marlo, you see them falling out of someone's jersey and you're running on the pitch to take it off. But yeah, so look, with a vest, those pods will cover probably, in most cases, kind of about 15 or 16 different metrics. So the one you hear a lot about is the distance covered. There'll be different kind of thresholds of high speed running. accelerations, decelerations, intensity per minute. It's all broken down in different speed metrics. What I try and do is you will take an average over 4 games and you will try and meet that average of each metric over the 3 nights of training, if that makes sense. So, for example, if our players are the number of sprints that they do in a match, if it's 8 sprints a match, I want to make sure we're getting eight, between 6 and 8 really quality, high quality sprints in training during the week. So it's in the bag, it's done, and it doesn't come as a surprise to their body when they have to do it in a match. So that's very layman's terms. But it's one example of how it would use with the girls. So this is going to get we're going to go down a rabbit hole here, but acceleration and deceleration is really, really important and a really under-trained aspect, particularly in female football. The ACL injury, which I'm sure you have heard a lot about, when you look at how it occurs, when it's non-contact, it's generally a girl jamming on the brakes with one leg and the knee collapses inwards. So we need to make sure that they can operate in chaos, and we need to make sure that, again, if there's a certain amount of decelerations in a game, if we're way below that over a 6-week training block, it kind of exposes them to a little bit of danger that they can't do it, they haven't done it, and when that chaos shows itself in the game, there's a potential for injury. Nothing's absolute. Obviously, certain people can tolerate certain things, but look, that's just one example of just the certain kind of numbers we look at. And then the other point of view then as well would be for rehab. When someone's coming back from injury, is that we're monitoring their load week by week. And you're not jumping up too high or you're not too low as they're progressing through the workload. So it's as I said, Jandy, it can be quite complex. It can be quite overwhelming when it's been thrown at you. It can be quite frustrating if the units aren't working. But look, as I said, we do our best to kind of make it work.
You make it look easy, Davey.
I don't. Trust me. You want to see me on a Monday night?
No. Well, you massage it to make it make sense. That's what a good pro does. Davey, you've been so good with your time tonight. I think it would be remiss of me. Just when I was preparing for our call this evening, I couldn't fathom that it's nearly 7 years since you took on the 10 and 10 marathon challenge back in 2018. Now, for any Shels or any newer listeners who may not be aware of this was an incredible challenge to take on 10 marathons in 10 days. For any man to do that, it was phenomenal. But I know, and I think a lot of people are fully aware of your backstory. You're an ambassador. I think you're very much involved with Aware, the mental health charity. How did that change your life when you went into it? Who was Davy O'Connor coming out of that challenge, besides being absolutely physically exhausted? But when you had time to digest and actually realise what you had done and people it had reached far beyond the world of Shelbourne, did you actually sit down and say, "Good God, I'm after achieving something fairly significant here"?
The one thing I always go back with that event was it was all about people. It wasn't just an idiot running around a running track. The whole thing just became about people, very organically. I sort of in the lead up maybe had in my head, you talk about kind of resilience and trying to prep yourself for this gigantic run that I was going to be sort of on my own doing these loops. Like, I don't think I was on my own once. I think the general rule of thumb I sort of had was like, if you're coming up, maybe just come up at 9:30. You give me a couple of laps to kind of get into the headspace. But for 10 days straight, it was just this conveyor belt of people walking in that gate. And everybody, it was amazing because everyone just got talking, and the stories you heard from so many different people, and you'd all my close friends, you'd all my family, you'd people I hadn't seen for 20 years, strangers. I remember a guy showed up actually who said his flight was delayed for 6 hours in Dublin airport, And he came across this on Facebook, so said, well, rather than sitting here, I'm going to go and run a few laps with this fella. Like, and like stories were like that were just insane. Like, but it really captured people's imaginations. People really got it. It raised a lot of money for Aware. And my dad, who Donny will be very familiar with, a very stoic gentleman, with very simple man with very honourable sort of principles and values. He kind of said to me afterwards, he said, the best way I can describe that, he said, was it was like Field of Dreams. He said, like, you built it and everybody came. Like, it was an incredible journey. It really was. Um, and as I said, it was made by people. How was I afterwards? I mean, look, it probably is something. I'll be honest, I think maybe even to this day, I probably haven't sat down and given it the reflection it maybe deserves. Like, because your life goes on. The next Monday was back sitting in the M50 and stuck in traffic going to work. Like, so, the biggest thing I remember just over the course of the 10 days saying, like, just right, it's a challenge, obviously gonna push me to the limits, but just enjoy every bit of it, because it is something extremely unique. And as I said, you sort of know, right, in a couple of weeks time you're back to your routine. But it was people that made that. It really was special. It really was special. And as you said, it was a lot of people with Shels got involved, a lot of people in the league got involved. And incredibly, I always do say this, I didn't even get a blister, which was really, really odd. Like, but yeah, amazing. And look, running's always been a massive part of my life, and just kind of, as Donny is sort of slagging me there, like, if it's a weekend, you'll find me up a mountain or out running, or, real kind of just simple things that I enjoy. Like, but that was a nice story from it as well. Like, there were loads of people that you met months later that said they never ran in their lives, but I go out doing a 5K now because that was amazing. So stories like that are incredible. So yeah, it's very hard to sum it up, Andy, in a very short slot in a pod, but
Of course.
special 10 days, really special 10 days. Like, and I really embraced it, I suppose, would be the best way to kind of sum it up. Like, but as I said, it goes down to people. People made it.
Dunny, when Dave was in his marathon bubble, fueling himself and running his legs off every day, this story touched the hearts of not just the club, but it touched the hearts and the minds of many outside in the wider, let's say, League of Ireland, and not just League of Ireland family. But Dave's message was fairly hard hitting, but it was so important in the background of what Aware we're doing for mental health, not just within a club, but within the league itself. It was an incredibly powerful time.
Absolutely. I think it speaks to the person that Davey is, and how since that time maybe he's found a clarity. I don't want to speak on his behalf, obviously, but I've known him nearly 20 years now, and I feel that he's been able to show himself in the fullest kind of way since around that time, where, sort of warts and all, and taking pride in his honesty and his openness, which is quite disarming at first, but I think, it's led other people to feel empowered to do the same, and to speak out about their own struggles, or just even to shoot the breeze about what they do, whether it's going for 5K runs and so on, to sort of get their own heads in order, and to help sort of just get through the trials and tribulations of life, and that there's nothing wrong with that, and to maybe lay down your guard a little bit more often than you might have done previously. Obviously, Davies as well. I know he for a long time he was answering phones for charities, for people who felt that they needed to speak to someone. He was doing that behind the scenes. I knew about it, and a few other people knew about it, but that's about it. I have a friend of mine, and a friend of other good Redsmen as well. Em O'Connolly was lost to suicide not long ago. We went up to see him actually before the Bows game recently. His parents are at every home game now, Liam and Lisa, and there's an annual game for Emo on on St. Stephen's Day now. But it just bears repeating that, you know, the principles that Davies espoused for a long time now about, you know, being free and vulnerable enough to open yourself up and talk to people, and that's only a positive thing, and that we can kind of help ourselves through sport, help ourselves through community, help ourselves through whatever it takes, and not to be too proud to speak on these issues. And you know, I started the podcast talking about how much more Davey gives to players that he works with, you know, week in, week out. And it's this kind of approach of being vulnerable and being open to other people's vulnerabilities, and sensitivity, you know, sensitive to them, that allows him to be so beloved in the dressing room and beyond at the football club. And again, it's worth repeating that we are absolutely, as a club, not just fortunate to have the players that we have in the women's team at the moment, but we are incredibly fortunate to have David O'Connor at this football club, because he really is one in a million. And yeah, and I love him.
Yeah, I think Davey might be a bit too modest, but thanks, Donny. I think you say that for many Reds out there. And Davey, before we let you go, Davey, you're still doing a bit of work in tandem with Aware. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, it's a long-standing kind of ambassador for them. So whatever's required of them, be it media appearances or kind of blog posts, things like that, like whatever they need, sharing the services that they provide. They do a really good kind of online life skills program that is something I'll always prompt to people. And I think particularly being that online setting, it can be a good place to start for maybe just for people looking to delve into a little bit of kind of self-reflection. And because I think certainly, maybe Dunny sort of said it there, like it can be a bit overwhelming for people if they're looking for, you know, where do I actually start? So sometimes online is a nice place to dip your toe in a sort of a private, discreet setting. So their services have helped me over time and continue to do so. And look, as I said, whatever they ask of me, I'll always do my best to kind of support them. And they've been very appreciative of the work, the kind of I've done, the money that has been raised from the different events and things that we've done. Like, but great organisation. And look, whether it's Aware or anybody else, I think if people just share the services that are available and don't be afraid to speak about what is available as well. And then look, the other one is just being there for your mates as well. And look, Dunny's blowing smoke up my arse as he tends to do, but look,
I
I do
loves
have to
that, yeah.
say, I have to call him back in this because we've known each other a very long time. But even through kind of my darkest periods, like himself, he's always been there for me. And we've a great chemistry and a quite a warped sense of humour that goes a long way, particularly on bad days when things mightn't be going too great. You can always rely on him for a good WhatsApp and a good laugh. So he's always been there for me. And yeah, he's I love him. I love him back.
Brilliant, Davey. Yeah, we'll put the Aware contact details in the show notes. Big question is, Davey, do the legs still have another 10 and 10 in them, or is maybe 1 and 1?
Yeah, nah, well, look, we're still running. Yeah, just churn out a Dublin marathon once a year as best I can. Certainly not as fast as I used to be, but do you know what? Like you just said, the reason I do it, I run for my head. To be honest with you, I'm not looking to. There's no Olympic qualification goals or anything, but I do enjoy the marathon. And what's cool is I there's actually so many people now, sort of in my life, that I know are doing it or have done one. So there is a bit of a common thread when you're chatting to people. But I think with Dublin, say the reason I do that is the atmosphere, the crowds. It's unbelievable. It's a really special day. I think end of October, usually the weather is generally okay, but anyone who's done it will tell you that, like, the whole way round, just the crowds, it just carries you. It really does. And yeah, look, I continue to do it as long as the legs are working. I'll keep doing it. But yeah, look, as I said, I get out, I do my runs, I do my workouts for me head as much as anything.
Brilliant, Davey. Donny, before we wrap up, any final thoughts before we let this young man go?
just to say thanks for jumping on, and again to promote it. I know it's a quiet week maybe for a lot of Shells fans, but if we can convince anyone maybe to come out on Saturday and jump on the train with us to Sligo, we'd love to see everybody out there in Sligo Saturday afternoon. And Davey, I'll see you out there.
Yeah, brilliant, lads. Thanks very much for having us.
Davey, thanks to you for all your time tonight. I think that our women's top team are in safe hands. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Back in action this Saturday, as Dunny said, in the All Ireland Cup. And then I will see you, hopefully, the week after in Talca for these big games. Looking forward to it. So, Dunny and Davey, thanks so much for joining us this week. We'll be back next week. And fingers crossed for 3 points. And let's top Group A in the All Ireland Cup this weekend. Wishing you all a pleasant week ahead, and we'll speak to you next week.